What we done started. Look at what we done started. This the people party. Peace and love, party people, and the place to be is the BKMC, the MCEO Talib Kweli. As always, and as usual, you were watching me on the world's best podcast, The People's Party. And as always, and as usual, I have my lovely and talented, thought-provoking, and hilarious co-host, Jasmin Leigh, in the place to be. What's up, Jasmin?
What up, what up?
How you feeling?
You know, I'm feeling like I should have a motorcycle right now because I'm ready to vroom, vroom with my jacket.
That outfit is giving me New York.
Amen.
Like a bamboo earring style.
At least two pair.
We are going all the way to Brooklyn, New York. East New York, Brooklyn today on today's episode of The People's Party. Our guest today is a poet, a writer, an activist. She is the youngest winner of the Nuyorican Poets Café Grand Slam, which she won when she was only 19 years old, an NAACP Image Award nominee. But these awards do not define her. These accolades do not define her. This woman has an incredible amount of cultural currency. She has given us The Black Unicorn Sings. Her writing has appeared in the anthology New Daughters of Africa. Her book, her fantastic collection of poetry, My Mother Was a Freedom Fighter, is a new classic, an ode to mothers, daughters, and sisters, or as our guest calls them, tiny gods who fight to change the world. In addition to her writing, our guest is also an activist, an active participant in the Say Her Name campaign, which highlights police brutality against Black women. Very, very important. She is a huge personal inspiration of mine and a reminder that art is always a vital part of the fight for social justice. Ladies and gentlemen, give it up for Marcus Garvey's last microphone, Aja Monet, in the place to be.
Yay, yay.
How are you?
I made it.
You made it.
Yes.
I love this
Please put
hair.
your purse down. Stay a while.
Yeah. Thank you.
How are you?
I'm good. Feeling good. Meditated this morning, so feeling zen.
Thank you for doing this with us.
Thank you for having me.
You and I have been in the same circles and hovered and circled around each other for years, but I don't think we've ever had an opportunity to have this long of a conversation.
No, never.
Yeah, so
yeah,
I'm very excited about this.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. First, to start, I'd like to thank you for this video you sent me of you and Vic Mensa doing a rendition of Brown Skin Lady.
Yeah.
It's very important to me that people feel good when they hear that song. Mm-hmm. For us to have written and performed that song over 20 years ago and to see you and Vic doing it on a stage. You said a bar in there, the industry is my favorite auction block.
Yeah,
that was a bar.
Thank you. It was being antagonistic and spiteful. You know, I wrote that verse like many years ago, and Vic and I were talking about wanting to do something that we could do together because I was going to open up for him, and I mentored him and been a part of his life and him a part of mine for so many years that it was a big deal to be opening for him in Brooklyn. So we're like, what are we going to do? And then I was like, we got to do Black Star. And they were like, but what song would we be able to that people would kind of recognize, everybody could recognize?
Yeah.
And he had written this verse to Brown Skin Lady, and his verse was crazy.
It really was.
Yeah. It was really beautiful. He acknowledged and named so many Black women on that track. And it was beautiful to see his growth as an MC, but also as I would see a aspiring, growing feminist, to see him start to question himself and think critically. And a lot of the people he named in that verse are people that I've encouraged him to read. So it was really dope to kind of flip the song in this other way, because, the song has its own meaning and history, but it was good to flip it in that way.
Yeah, Vic was on our show a couple of years ago at the start of the pandemic on Zoom. And me personally watching his growth has been amazing as an artist and as a human being and what he's been into. And, he's been on huge hit records, but it's almost like he left the music industry to focus on being an artist. He focuses less on being a celebrity and more being an artist.
Yeah.
You are of Cuban and Jamaican descent. Cuban and Jamaican culture is mashed up all inside of you.
Yeah.
You have documented your grandmother's immigrant experience in the poem, What My Grandmother Meant to Say Was. Can we talk a little bit about the complicated relationship Cubans have with Castro's rule and what's happened politically?
Oh, interesting. I didn't see it going that way. I can't speak for Cubans, but what I can speak for my experience that I maybe one day plan to put into a book, but I did do as a show at the Nuyorican was I did this show called Querida Revolución, Soy Tu Nieta, which was Dear Revolution, I'm Your Granddaughter. And it was really dealing with what I discovered when I went to Cuba. I got invited for a grassroots poetry festival, which was called Caminos de Palabras. And it's these young poets that were working together to bring poets out to Cuba. And when I went and saw from firsthand what was going on, I discovered family I didn't know that I had there. I started to have real difficult conversations about what the revolution really meant for interpersonal relationships between family members and the struggle that families still have on the strain between themselves around revolution. I think revolution, we always think of, at least politically as organizers, we talk about revolution, revolution. And I think that we have to really understand how that shows up internally and what we're facing within ourselves when we are fighting these larger systemic issues. Because, you know, what good is it to change, to have the government fall, right, or the system change, and we're walking around with, you know, as zombies without a heart and a mind and a soul and a spirit. So I think just seeing that, having that experience taught me a lot, and it let me know that there's no one side. I don't know what to say about, I can't speak to the perspective from Cubans on the revolution. I think I got to let them speak for themselves, because I learned a lot. I had a lot of ideas, romantic ideas about the revolution and what I thought it meant. And I think that when you see, not so much because of, you know, just Castro and the politics and the issues around him, but when you see the implications of making that decision as a small island country when everything else around you is trying to drain you of resources and access and visibility and representation, it's wild, you know? So they were up against such a vast monster. But still, I want to just highlight that in spite of all of that, Cubans, you know, Cuba was one of the main countries to have discovered a vaccine before anybody else, you know, has the highest exported doctors, a 99%, you know, literacy rate. There are some things that we can learn from the revolution. I think we just in the movement sometimes are so extreme and so comfortable in our extremities that we don't realize that there's lessons we can take from everywhere, from everyone. And let's start to improve upon those when we see that it's necessary.
Your grandmother has also been a constant inspiration in your poetry. Have you always been close with her? And can you share with us some of your lessons that she taught you?
Well, I have not always been close with her at all. I'm not very as close to my family as I would like to be. But I think that's the struggle of many people. So I don't think I'm unique in that. What I can say is that poetry has been the place where I've struggled with those emotional truths, the things that I've learned. And I have a very nostalgic, but because of so much of my childhood be shaping who I am, and I think shaping all of us, it's when I go sit down to write, I know that I'm not writing alone. And I know that I'm possible because of all of these people, for their flaws and their, you know, their goodness and their greatness, they all made me possible. So I think of my grandmother as someone that I've had to learn to have compassion for, because she was a very cold and stern person when I was younger. And then as she's gotten older, she got a lot softer. And when I went to Cuba and I did this festival, I got to see her perspective from another place. I found children that she had left behind that I had not known about.
Oh, wow.
You know, and no one had ever talked about. So I had to be the person, the grandchild, to come back home and be like, what is this? What's going on? And poetry, you know, is what saves me every day. So it was the place where I was able to process those emotions and think through those feelings and things. But at the end of the day, you know, your family, you don't choose them, you know? Yeah. Or at least maybe
your
you
blood
did at
family
another.
You don't choose. Yeah.
Maybe in another time or spiritual space we did. I think everything that I was raised with made me the person I am today, and I'm very proud to be from that tradition.
Yes, indeed. I am also, as an artist, got to visit Cuba with Malcolm X grassroots movement. And then I went back again when it was more opened up in the Obama era. But both times, consistently, it was Nehanda Abiodun who made sure that I was good.
Yeah. Oh, he gonna make me cry.
Oh, man. Well, rest in peace to Nahanda. In My Mother Was a Freedom Fighter, you have a poem, Nehanda Taught Me. It's written about your experiences with Nehanda and Assata Shakur, and it features the line, I wish you more freedom and less fighting. I wish that for them as well. And I'm glad to have shared that experience that you had as well with them.
Yeah. Nahanda's the reason, man, I'm sorry, I'm going to get emotional.
That's all good.
Nahanda's the reason that I published that book.
Wow.
Because I had gone with my partner at the time, Phil, we had gone to Cuba, and I'm one of the most self-critical artists and writers, and I think as an artist, I don't know how you struggled through this, but as an artist, you're always balancing how you show up between what you say and what you feel and what you truthfully believe in, and then what actions you do to validate and or affirm those values and the things that you share. So you're constantly in this struggle. At least I was, and I think she was the person that made it very clear to me that your art is organizing.
Yeah,
and that she said to me, she was like, "Our people need your poems." She was like, "Our sisters need your poems," and I had given her a chapbook. The first day I had met her, and I thought, oh, maybe she'll read it. Maybe she won't, whatever. We were scheduled to meet with her the next day. And when I met with her, she had read it all the way through. And she had all these things lines she quoted and things she really resonated with her. And I won't forget that poem was written after that night. That same night, we went out, and I had realized how much she had sacrificed for us, and for the greater good of our people, and just how we romanticize the fight. We get to kind of sit around and be like, yeah, this and that and the third, but what does it mean to really put your life behind it? And more still, that most of the Black women I know in my life have never truly been loved the way they deserve. And it is a travesty in our community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It is literally the one thing that's holding us back, is that Black women have not been loved the way that they deserve to be loved. Yeah. And so seeing her still in that state in Cuba, and at that time seeing her in a relationship that at that point I had assumed was kind of toxic and abusive, it was hard to watch. And it was hard to see someone that you respect so much still just at the end of the day wanting to be loved and remembered and valued. And I think that is the freedom that I'm fighting for, is that we need to be loving each other better. And I'm not saying, it's one or the other, but there is clearly a discrepancy in power dynamics and privilege between men and women, or people who identify as men and women. And we have to rectify that within our communities, because until we can do that, if we say the foundation is love, if everything starts from love, then we're speaking out of our asses if we really claim we want to be free, and our sisters are over here like oppressed. You know what I mean? That's not freedom. So I think that that's part of my lesson that I got with her, and then also it was a big part of me feeling like, oh, I'm supposed to do this. I need to keep doing this. I don't need to give up on it. So yeah, Nahanda.
Rest in peace to Nahanda.
Long-winded response, but I love her.
I love that poem. If you weren't in New York at that time, a lot of people don't understand really how important the Nuyorican Poets Café was to the poetry and spoken word scene, and for playwrights. I saw Amiri Baraka do a play there at the Nuyorican when I was a kid.
Yeah. To hip hop.
Yeah, to hip hop.
Yeah. Babito said so many MCs started there. I think didn't I see, he said Big Pun used to come.
Absolutely. Lyricist Lounge was there.
Yeah, Saul Williams I think did his first poem there.
Jessica, everybody was there.
People don't know Rich Medina was out here reading poems.
Yeah, Rich Medina, what do he don't do? Rich Medina does it all.
Facts.
He used to work at the sneaker shop that Babito owned in Philly. He's a DJ.
One of the best.
He's a poet. He's a social justice activist. Yeah, Richard, he's incredible. Now, you won this Grand Slam championship at age 19.
Yeah.
Right, 2007.
A long time ago.
Seems like a world ago, right?
Let's not say that because we're the same age.
But
Pretty long.
tell me about the importance of that scene and that place in your life at that time.
Oh, yeah. Thank you for asking this question, because I think that what's different between how art is being made now and that time period is that we didn't have the social media relationship that people have now. So being a part of a community was really how you knew how to sharpen your chops, how to get better, how to learn what was working, what wasn't. You perfected your craft in community with people. And so I think that especially not just the legacy and tradition of the Nuyorican Poets Café, but all that came with those poets who came through there. You think about Miguel Algarin, Miguel Algarin, rest in peace, Miguel Pinheiro, rest in peace. You know, you think about Pedro Pitri, you think about Amiri Baraka, so many poets, Jane Cortez. A lot of poets came through those spaces and they were able to shift the culture. Because once you have a community and an arts community, that permeates everything around it. You know, people don't realize that it's like the MCs show up there, it'd be the bartender, it'd be the dancer, it'd be the singer, and all these people go off into their own communities and worlds. And when they leave with the remnants of the voices that were spoken over them, and the things that were said and shared over them. So I think being a part of the Nuyorican at that time, I mean, I got to train with masters. I got to sit and learn from the best and be around my elders. And I was raised up under Abiodun Oyewole of the Last Poets. So I got to see, and then come on, then there's just New York at that time in general. There was the Schomburg and I got to see Maya Angelou, front row. I got to see Lucille Clifton, Ishmael, all these poets that most young people don't get exposed to. So I never grew up with an inadequacy around being Black or around our identity or around our culture. Like, I just knew we were rich in so much.
Yes.
And I think having access to that was so important. Whereas now social media has made it so that people don't, they don't get the type of workshop space to go up, let me try this poem and do this on open mic and see what the audience response is and how we communicate with each other. It's an oral tradition I come from, the Black radical imagination and what we did with the Black arts movement. It's an oral tradition and it's completely related to community. So you have to it's having a conversation.
Right.
If you're just going, on the internet, teach everybody to have a voice and just be talking and talking and talking, but no one's actually listening and people aren't learning how to actively listen and engage in discourse. So before you get hurt and be in your feelings about something, why don't we just first think about, well, why does that hurt? Where did it come from? What is this? Is this person even real? Like, is this a real person? Because the bot culture is real, is a whole thing. I think social media is making it so that we're disconnected from our skill sets between one another in communication. Yeah. Just how to communicate and express one's feelings and ideas and emotions with respect and integrity and dignity for the person behind the screen. You just assume the worst rather than, hey, maybe this is somebody's daughter, somebody's son, somebody's, It shouldn't take that, but that's what it's become.
Yeah, the community aspect is so important. Abiodun, the Last Poets, they're hugely influential on me as well. But those same communities, I'm a little older than you, so it's like we overlap. We have a lot of people in common, but it was a little different. But I always remind people that my career started from the stew that I was a part of, whether it be Lyricist Lounge, or Nuyorican, or Washington Square Park, or even to Raucous to a degree. When I got signed to Raucous, the community that formed around that was very, very important.
I also want to shout out Urban Word NYC, which was an organization that I had come up in prior to Nuyorican. It was a youth organization that provided poetry workshops, performance opportunities, all these things. So I was being mentored by some of the greatest of the greats at that time as well. So I think that was a big part of, when I first heard, I didn't even think about the Nuyorican or the adult scene until some kids was like, you can make money from reciting a poem. And I'm like, what? They were like, yeah, you could do a slam, you can get $50. And I'm like, no way. And as when you're doing poetry as a kid, you're not thinking you're going to make money off of it. You're just like, I'm just expressing my heart, you know. And
you did Brave New Voices as well, right?
Yeah, I did Brave New Voices. I was a part of, I got to say this proudly, but I was a part of the first youth team to win nationals as a New York, we represented that year. So it was in the Bay Area.
Doubt.
And
I was there, I think.
I think you were.
I think I hosted that.
And that was the year that I remember thinking we were going to change the world.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I really believed it because the poems that kids were spitting at that time, this is pre-Def, when Stan Lathan did
Def Poetry Jam.
Yeah, but Def Poetry Jam was on, but it wasn't the kids. They weren't following the kids. The Brave New Voices thing. It was before kids was on TV for poetry, which changed the entire dynamic because then people started having egos and people started wanting to be seen and it changed everything. But that year, 2005, I think it was, we were able to hear poems from all over the country, and that was before this political consciousness moment.
Yeah.
So hearing kids, 16, 15, 17,
amazing
18,
pieces.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
just blowing your mind. You're learning about the country and the issues in the country at that time. Bush was there,
Yeah.
So the kids were like, fuck, the government, the adults, they don't know what they're doing. And they're eloquent. And I was like, man. And so I think that poetry community and those kids is clearly directly linked to the current cultural shift and moment we have now. Because a lot of them went off and became social workers or educators or teachers or organizers. And I think that poetry was a big place of planting the seeds of like, what are our issues? How do we express about them? How do we tell the truth? And how do we try to do something to resolve them? And that's a big part of my upbringing.
One of your biggest inspirations is great writer and activist June Jordan. Oh, yeah. Just like you, her parents are from Jamaica and a Spanish-speaking place. And you said she's inspired you with every fiber of your being. So we wanted to give you this chance to give June Jordan her flowers.
Aw, thank you.
That smile alone.
I look to make my elders proud, and June is one of the people that I pray I could make proud. I think of I got to do the forward recently for Robin D.G. Kelly's book Freedom Dreams, and something he talks about in Freedom Dreams is the role of poets and decolonizing our imagination and being a big part of social movements. And so to me, June Jordan is the epitome of that when you sit and read her work, you realize she was writing with us in mind and not so much about the idea that we needed somebody else to free us, but that we had the power, that the people had the power to free themselves if only they could get rid of, their own ways of self-governing and oppressing one's own mind with insecurity and doubt and the things that I think are intentional and strategic for us to not see ourselves and not to love one another. So I think the way she loves with language is what makes me really, really proud to be in her legacy and in her tradition. And there's so many others. Ntozake Shange is a huge inspiration of mine. Sonia Sanchez, Nikki Giovanni, Angela Jackson.
Sonia.
Yeah, I know. She told me you guys did a talk. I have a poem on an album that I worked on that she's a part of, and I actually played it for Dune 2 weeks ago, and he heard it and called Sonia up. And I got to talk to her about it. But I had already read it to her like years ago before the pandemic at the Schomburg. So, being able to pay homage to your elders is a big part of my tradition and our tradition. So I think that that's something that I like to carry with me every day. I know that I'm not here alone.
Yes, indeed. I saw on the internet you talking about June Jordan at some event. And you had a quote. You said, her essays do not flatter, yet they mirror us. And I was like, this really speaks to what Aja does in her work. When you wrote that poem for Nahanda, I felt that. You're telling us exactly who this person is. You did that with me. You came to my defense years ago in an essay. For Women, Love, and Hip Hop, A Reflection Eternal, which is an essay that's named after one of my groups. And I had a public debate. It wasn't really an argument. It was a debate with Jamila and Rosa Clemente on Mark Lamont Hill's show about this Rick Ross date rape lyric that he had in his things. And my sisters were rightfully challenging and critiquing Rick Ross, and I was pushing back on a piece of the critique in which they were saying he doesn't belong in hip hop. And my point at that point, and these are my good friends, and we have these type of arguments all the time, and that's what a lot of people lost in that conversation. They thought it was like me against them. But my point was, what I was trying to make was about bringing people in with love and bringing people in as opposed to calling them out. And just as a hip hop artist, I felt, as a male in hip hop, I felt accountable that I had to hold Rick Ross accountable. I had to hold myself accountable for even participating in a culture that allows him to think it's okay to drop a lyric like that. Me and Rick Ross ended up having a conversation about it. He was upset at me for calling him out, but we ended up talking about it, and then we did a song together in which he addresses this whole situation. But your essay, you said, though I always have had my critiques of how men in hip-hop have addressed women, I understood all too well the root of patriarchy is not hip-hop, and that our men are as much victims of patriarchy as they are perpetrators of it. I wanted to give you a chance. I want to thank you. Right?
Good job, Asha.
Yeah, that was good.
I forgot about that, so I was like, what did I say?
Yeah, no. Well, you didn't.
I was way ahead of the curve, okay.
You challenged me in terms of being more clear in that essay. Like you had my back, which I really appreciate, because a lot of people were coming at me.
And I think I had everyone's back.
You had everyone's back.
That was the point.
Yes.
The point was that it wasn't about one person's back or the other. It was just that, like, why are we fighting, us as Black people, why are we fighting online about this? Like, don't y'all realize the issue is much larger than us? So we have to do better. You know, even, like, I didn't know much about the situation that happened with you online, and I had heard about it and all this. And I think, for me, what I hope to see from our brothers is more just the willingness to listen and the willingness to show compassion and tenderness with us, even as we deal with our frustrations and anger.
Yeah.
Because I think sometimes what you all miss, or at least you in that moment, I think missed, is that we're all carrying a lot of pain. And so when you think about what patriarchy and whiteness and white supremacy has done, in that moment, what would have probably been the thing to do that could have affirmed the pain while also speaking to the truth of your own reality is like, yeah, colorism is an issue in our community. That's
Are you talking
true.
about that situation?
Yeah, no.
Oh, okay, we skipped to that one.
I'm talking
yeah.
about, but there's multiple. I'm talking about that one and this one, because I'm bringing that one up.
Yes.
I'm saying there's a way.
I'm trying to keep up here.
Yeah, sorry.
Right.
I'm that. I thought I
got
was
you.
clear.
I'm here.
So there's like, that's an issue. Patriarchy is an issue. These are things that we can name and leave room for people to be affirmed in them and say, hey, these are issues in our community. Now, am I trying to be the perpetrator of that? No, I'm trying to actively work towards that. There's room for all of us to grow. But I think that what ends up happening oftentimes in that situation, in other situations, is that we don't say, you know what? I'm not going to take it personal that you're actually hurt in this moment, because it's bigger than just me. This is something that is larger than just me, but I'm going to actively see, how can I show up and be in better solidarity? Because solidarity is the solution to all of our problems.
Yes, indeed.
Radical solidarity is the solution to all of our problems. And what I don't see, even in instances when people was coming at Lauryn Hill for, you know, all the stuff that they were saying about her, I was like, man, you know what hurt about that was just that we don't need our brothers doing it publicly online,
right?
Where it's like everybody can see. And if you have an issue, then how do we resolve this with each other? Like, what are we trying to do to actually lift each other up and make a resolution rather than attack one another? Because they've already given us the platform to do that enough. Right. So solidarity to me is about listening, and it's about showing up and doing the work and doing the research, being committed beyond the visibility and the optics, and radically shifting one's relationship to power. So when we think about Black women and Black men and the tension between our ideas and value systems, a lot of it is rooted in white supremacy, patriarchy, capitalism, and all these things that are just isms that are bigger than us, but they work out in interpersonal relationships. Yeah. So the interpersonal is where we got to get free. That's actually where the difficult work is. It's when somebody, you think about when a white man is coming at you, right? Or a Black man is yelling at a white man. Let's say he's yelling at him and going off at him about something. Now, men understand this. Black men understand this. A white man going and being like, you know what? Well, I'm going to call the police and fuck this Black person and calling him all these things. They're going to assume, okay, but you're the person of power. you, the white person, have power. You know that beyond this moment of this person yelling at you, you can move freely in the world and not have to deal with this again. So you have the ability to sit back and just say, let me just listen and learn from this situation, because I know in the world and in how the world sees us systemically, we have power. Right. And I think that doesn't happen often with Black men and Black women, where because Black men feel like they're so victimized, they don't realize we're victims with you, but also we victims of you. So these are things that when you say, oh, I have a mother, I have a sister, I have a daughter, but have you done the work to understand how this shows up in your day-to-day relationships? And I love our brothers. That's where that piece came from. That's why I said in that piece, it was like, love is a political technology in my perspective. Yeah. It's not just feelings and romance and all this stuff. It's like, it's an action that you have to be committed to taking in every step facet. And some of us slip. Some of us move from anger and frustration and all those things, fear, but you have to question, am I moving from fear or love?
Yeah. Yeah. And I appreciate everything you're saying. There's a couple of parts that I want to amplify what you just said, and a couple of parts I want to push back against.
Yeah.
Right.
I love it.
So as far as the situation with the colorism situation, when you said you should have said that colorism is an issue and this and that, well, I absolutely...
I didn't say should. I said you could have. It's just a statement we could all have made,
Well, I absolutely did that. I did that off top. That's exactly what I did. The issue for me it wasn't just me the issue was never about colorism. And I think that's the narrative, the dominant narrative. It's never about colorism. It was about, here's a woman who is coming after the Black women in my life in the name of protecting Black women. And so, the conversation started as a conversation on colorism over a woman that I'm not even in a relationship with anymore, but because that wasn't public knowledge at the time, I still felt protective of our privacy. So I didn't say, well, this is my ex-wife, as opposed to this is my wife. Yeah. But, a bunch of rappers were critiqued by a woman who might not even be a woman, because I don't know if this is even a real person who did this critique, because this person's never showed up. But by someone who, in their tweets, they also got kicked off of Twitter, was talking about how they need a white man, how Black man can't do nothing for them. So this, to me, was a hypocritical thing. And when I called out the hypocrisy on this, you're calling me out for colorism, but you're tweeting how you need a white zaddy or whatever the language she was using. Then it became, you are a child molester. Then it became, I'm going to change my picture online to the picture of your child's mother.
Yeah, I think the part where I want to lean into with you as my brother right now is that, when do you turn it off?
Okay, so that's the part I want to amplify.
When do you say, there has to be a moment, because I'm saying like social media can be triggering and it can be, but this is what it's built to do, is to keep you on it longer, sitting there more emotionally triggered, and then you just keep in that cycle. So I'm saying, as someone that is concerned for not just you, but all of our well-being, is that we have to also divest from social media at times.
Well, that's where I was going to go next.
We have to actively be like, okay, this is producing an emotion in me that I don't want to feel, and it's making me step out of character. So at the point at which I'm stepping out of character, this is something I had to learn. Right. I had to learn this too. Right. At the point at which, because I used to go wild off on Twitter, and say things crazy. But I think at the point at which I'm stepping out of character, and when I meet people outside and they're starting to judge me because of what they think I said or didn't say online, I have to realize, no, real relationships is where all organizing happens. It's where all movements happen. It's where everything shifts. So I cannot allow a person that I'm not in real relationship with to dictate my emotional reality. And then therein shift an entire narrative about who I am as a person. So now you're in a situation where you have to fight this off of someone you weren't even really in relationship with.
Well, that's why I don't disagree with that. And that's where I said there's some parts I want to push back against and some parts I want to amplify. Yeah. And that's the part I want to amplify. So while I don't think that I did anything wrong when it came to colorism or defending the honor of my family, the Black women in my life, the mistake, so I don't feel like my mistake was that. The mistake, if I look back in retrospect, was what you just said, was understanding I didn't need to litigate it in that way. I didn't need to defend myself that way. I didn't step out of character because I was having those same type of engagements with white supremacists or ADOS or whoever there was online. This is just what I was doing. But now we talk about those power dynamics. And that's where people were critical of me on, because they're looking at my platform. You spoke, I'm not going to rehash it because you spoke well about it.
Yeah.
You know, the issue of understanding the power dynamics in that situation and what the perceived power of this person is versus what my actual power is.
Yeah, everything starts back with self.
Yeah.
You know, and this is stuff that I learned through y'all's albums.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yes, indeed.
part of what I learned about feeling and learning about my value system and, you know, Dead Prez. I mean, it's the reflection of self. It's being able to say, and I think that's where the true revolution and change and love happens. It's like being able to say, wait, actually, how do I go inward in this moment rather than project outward? And so we're all having to learn that. But right now, because everybody want to have their own TV show and be on their own platform,
Right.
it's really hard for us to say, maybe the place I have to go is inward right now.
Yeah.
And this is a moment where I have to say, I don't need to defend myself against
Right.
this person. Because
Right.
once I start defending myself against this person, I start to seem as if I have to defend something.
Right.
You know what I mean? And that's the part of the problem where I think when our brothers hear things, rather than getting defensive, I think it's just, it might trigger and it might hurt and sting because it's something that you don't want to hear from a sister, especially when you love your sisters and you want to show that. But sometimes it's not about you. You know what I mean? And I think that when we know how power works, when we have an analysis around power, which is something we try to do in our movement spaces, then we can start to make more informed strategic decisions about how we show up, how we critique
Right.
each other, how we love each other. And I would say that the wound is the worst place to speak from. It sometimes is the most tender and like it heals and it can teach you so much. But it's not always going to speak from the most loving and understanding and compassionate and
Right.
sensitive place. But I just hope that as Black people, we have to be willing to show each other more love than we have to love each other more than we hate our enemies. And that's the thing that is our struggle. Our struggle is to love each other more than we hate our enemies. And once I think we can do that, we can start to really do something, you know?
Well, yeah, to that point, have you heard my song State of Grace?
No.
So State of Grace is a song I wrote as an ode to Black women who are in love with hip hop but don't feel like hip hop is loving them back. And I wrote this song out of a necessity based on that earlier interaction, the one in which about the Rick Ross thing, because I made a mistake that I was very clear. It was a clear mistake. Somebody had written, Crunk Feminist had written an essay and talking about how I could be a better ally to Black women. And the mistake I made was saying, I'm definitely an ally. Look at who I am. Look at Talib Kweli, baby. It's me, baby. You know, you ain't never heard these records I did? Look what I do. Look at my kids. I love Black women. I have a daughter. I have a mother. I was doing that. And I learned in that moment to not do that. But if I
because
didn't,
we all have still so much more to go.
Yeah.
Like, I think the point is, and that you learn from like the Dalai Lamas and the Buddhists and all these great people, is that none of them move around with this like, you know, confidence as if they got it all under and I got all the answers and I did everything that needs, like even the best of us, we still got something to learn. There's light. So long as you're living, you still got something to learn. And so I think moving with that sort of humility and grace is what leads to the sort of profound relationships and transformational justice we want to see, which is we still got a lot of work to do and we still have a lot to learn. And you are just one man, right? So there's like a whole host of other niggas that got a lot of work to do.
Yes, indeed.
And that's where a lot of these responses are coming from.
Yes, indeed. Now, I found it interesting that your mother was an MC, Baby E.
Oh my God, where did you find this? Y'all really did some research, huh? People never interview me, oh my God.
So clearly you got some form of love or language from her. And what's your relationship to hip hop based on the fact that your mom's was an MC?
Well, I have to just big up that my mother is someone that I have a real love for and also a big struggle with, as most of us do. There's a lot that I learned about being raised from a single mother and what that does to the psyche, what that does to the emotional stability and the relationships that they have in the world. And it wasn't our society and our system is not built for mothers, definitely not single Black mothers. And so I wrote my book, My Mother Was a Freedom Fighter, because I started to see things through the lens of my mother at a time when I was like, not just her, but as someone who wanted to have kids and to potentially be a mother, that, oh, wow, like this is not set up for us. So anybody who chooses to have a child at this point is a motherfucking freedom fighter.
Right.
You know, anybody, whether you choose or choose not to have a child, you become a freedom fighter in this system just based off of how the system is set up. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, you know, growing up in Brooklyn, I have this track that I sent you that it's from this poem called Give My Regards to Brooklyn.
Yeah.
And we released it before Celebrate Brooklyn. And one of the things that I touch on in there is, you know, the many metaphors and ways of seeing Brooklyn and how Brooklyn shaped so much of my perspective. I remember the first time someone handed me a tape of Black Star. I remember the first time someone handed me a tape of Wordsworth. You know, I had cassettes, you know what I mean? Because we couldn't afford no CD player. So, and it was my brother's hand-me-down, which had the tape around it. So those are things that like Tupac was such a big influence for me. It was Tupac, Sade, Mary J. Blige. Those are all things my mom used to play. Toni Braxton. And I remember thinking like the emotion that's put into the words, it's not just the words, it's the way that words are said. I think about the way my mom uses language, the way my aunts, the way everybody that cultivates who you are teaches you something about storytelling and language. And so I think that was a big part of me being like, well, maybe I can't be a rapper because I don't know if I could rap. But
you
I was
can, by the way.
I was like, thank you. Coming from you. I was like, but I got something, you know what I mean? I know how to work with language, and I have this thing inside of me. Like I feel so deeply, you know? I feel everything, and it's a gift and a curse because I love so hard, and the feeling can just be in there to the point where it's like I have to exercise it. And I imagine that's how any artist is. So it's like if you don't exercise it, it's stuff, you start to become self-destructive.
Yeah.
So poetry was the thing that I was like, well, at least let me just start writing this out. And once I started writing it out, I realized, oh, wow, like this is something, writing was the first thing anybody ever told me I was good at. My teacher in school. So if they would have told me I was good at, I don't know, writing chalk on the wall, I would have been like the chalk artist. I would have figured it out. But that was the thing that somebody told me I was good at. And I said, wow, I'm good at this. Let me try this, you know, let me keep doing it. And when that became a thing and I fell in love with hip hop and I heard rappers, I was like, I don't know if I could do this beat thing, but if you just give me my breath and a room, I can put some words together. And so now as I'm getting older, and I realize I've been able to be so inspiring and inspired by so many MCs, I'm starting to have a better relationship to words and music.
Yes, indeed. I'm glad you brought up Give My Regards to Brooklyn. It's a great piece. I know it's in your book already, but putting it to music, I think was a fantastic idea. We had my brother on here, Jamal Green. He's an author as well. He's a constitutional law professor. And he wrote a book called When Rights Went Wrong. And it's a very, very intelligent, wonky read. But it's a good book, makes some good points. But on this show, he talks about his experience. He was accepted into the Hunter College High School program, and we lived deep in Brooklyn. And he talked about how having to take the train every morning from deep in Brooklyn to Manhattan, commuting through these different neighborhoods, changed him as a teenager. And you sort of speak about this in that piece.
Yeah.
And you paint some of the most vividly stunning portraits of Brooklyn I have ever read. You make me feel very proud to be from Brooklyn. But on this poem, you speak specifically about gentrification. So I want to ask you, in your opinion, how do we combat the negative effects of gentrification in a sensible way in a nation of 300 million people?
Yeah. Wow, that's a big question. It means a lot to me that you really resonate with that poem, because I was like sending it to you, and I was like, I didn't know I was going to be on this show. I just wanted you to hear it.
It's funny how this conversation happened.
And then now I'm here. But, you know, Brooklyn is like, for me, it was the place where my grandmother lived, so it's where we always went back to. And I didn't realize at the time, my grandmother was a santera, and I didn't realize at the time that, you know, she would always make me sit at the front porch because I was loving the TV and wanting to watch shows and all these things. And she'd be like, get out, go outside, you gotta go outside.
Right.
And I didn't realize she was teaching me to people watch at that time. But it was like learning how to read people, and I got to observe a lot about the world sitting on that porch for summers and many days. And I think about like taking the train, and the first time she made me take the train, I was 10 years old, and I was terrified. And taking that J train all the way, and they told me the directions several times, and I was like. Still like, oh my God, is this the right way? Is this the right?
Phone.
Oh my God,
That's
no
some
cell
New York
phone.
shit.
No
Where
cell
kids
phone.
are 10 years old, 8, 9, 10 years old, to taking a train by themselves.
Oh my Lord, yeah. But it changed everything for me because I learned so much about the world riding those trains and, commuting in New York. That poem in Gentrification, man, that's a big question because as someone who's an organizer, I realized that we need to be thinking about things and steps we can take now and the long-term vision. So there are things that we can do now, but there's also larger systemic things that need to be shifted in order for, those smaller changes to really have an impact. When I think about gentrification, you have to think about so many other factors, which includes, the minimum wage. It includes affordable housing. It includes community centers. It includes education. It includes healthcare and access to universal healthcare. So the thing that's difficult about the issues that we face as a community is that they all are interconnected. And until we can value human life, nothing that we do will actually make a difference, right?
Right.
And not just human life, but the environments that we take up, the spaces that we take up, because we wouldn't be here without the planet. So affordable housing to me in New York and the ways that, people unionized, people fought for public housing, et cetera. I think that these are things that we must always remember we have to continue to show up for. We have to continue to fight for because things don't change overnight and they don't change because you just believe in one day it's going to change.
Right.
But gentrification is not just an issue in America, in New York City and Brooklyn or Miami and South Florida. It's not just an issue in Detroit. It's not just an issue it's everywhere. You go to France, you go to, Paris, London, even Ghana. You go, people are moving into places because they have a little bit more money than, or a little less money than the really rich people, but they can still afford a certain house and community. And then the people who grew up there can't afford to live there anymore. And I think until we make some things stabilized for people to be able to afford rent and stay in their homes, then it won't change. And values. I think you have to teach people to value their neighborhoods.
Yeah.
Because a lot of what happened in Brooklyn was that people were coming with cash in their suitcases and being like, I'll buy your house, which is dilapidated or falling apart. They can barely pay the mortgage or something. So when somebody comes with money, it sounds tantalizing. You're like, okay, I'm just going to take it. And we lose an entire history.
Especially if you're someone who has lived in this city and lived, it's a hard life. It's not a good quality of life when you think about maybe moving down south or something and having more space and better air quality and stuff. It's very seductive. It's very hard to say no to those if you're a person living in that situation.
Yeah. I think gentrification is part of a larger systemic issue, but it is one of the many ways that capitalism manifests itself in our communities and our society. And so it's the strong arm of capitalism over the throats of the poor.
Yeah.
And I think that we need to see the reality, see it for what it is and say, okay, yeah, some of you at the top are living lovely, which is it's so backwards to me because I don't know why wealthy people don't want poor people to be okay.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, that shit is always going to come at your back, at your backyard. It's going to always show up at your backyard. So when somebody robs you or somebody's coming for your house or whatever, what do you think that is? That's because people don't have a good, decent, most people just need to feel integrity, some dignity in their human life.
Yeah.
Like they have something they can come home to, that they can pass on to their family. That's like the assumption, the scarcity mentality that America has produced in the psyche of our people, especially our young people, is terrifying because we truly live in a planet that is abundant. It's abundant. We have so much to share. So moving from a place of scarcity, like, oh my God, I got to take all the resources and keep them for myself, is such a backwards, it's actually going to hurt you more.
That's right.
So I don't understand that. And I think all of that is connected to gentrification.
Absolutely.
For sure. You have a poem called The Whistleblower. For those who don't know the story of Chris Dorner, could you tell us about it right now, please?
Dorner was a brother who was working for the LAPD, and he basically went rogue. And part of him going rogue, and I'll never forget because I was on my way to do a show in, I think, Nevada or something. I had seen it on the news in the hotel room. And I remember thinking, this is wild, because I remember the chase.
Yeah.
The chase for him. And then he had come out, I don't know if he had come out with the manifesto right before the chase or right during the chase, but he had written this manifesto.
They said they
He
found
named
it
Dave
after.
Chappelle
I think
in
they
that
found it
manifesto.
after. Huh?
He named Dave Chappelle in the manifesto.
I don't remember who he named, but I just remember, like, you know, there's certain things that Black people feel that we just don't say publicly, but we be feeling. And I just remember being like, brother, I hope they don't find you.
Right.
I was just like, this is, you know, good luck, good riddance, because that is wild. Because essentially he went off and I believe he killed a few LAPD officers.
I think like 3 or 4.
Yeah, which I don't condone, you know, violence in any way, shape, or form. But you got to admit that, like, when the police is coming for you and you see no vengeance, no justice, no nothing, no time served, there's a moment where people will start to get fed up and start to do things that are outside of character.
And they could have saved those lives by just simply admitting that they fired him because he...
Yeah, so exactly. So then he got fired. The reason why he went rogue, which is they left that out, was like because of him seeing the implicit bias and racism within the LAPD, not just within himself and his own career, but also how they were treating other Black police officers and Black people. So he was, you know, it was the first time we had a Black officer from the inside that I had remember in my, like, you know, lifetime or upbringing really disclose the family business of the LAPD and say some things that no other officer had ever had the audacity to say. And then that poem was written because I just remember thinking of how they found him. And he had ran into the woods, and I don't even think they found a body.
Yeah, they shot up the house he was in a bunch of times.
And killed other people. Well, no, I don't know if they killed him, but they shot other people that weren't even...
Yeah, I mean, we all knew that what was going to happen when they found him. You know, there was no... It's just some things that, like, there's certain things that happen in culture, in like political, social culture, that, like, as you just remember the voices and the moments as Black people, what we all were feeling and thinking at that time. And that was one of those things where it's like, man, when they get him, he's going to be...
I mean, well, we had the example of Serpico in pop culture, right? Al Pacino played this character very well, but this is a real story based on a real person of a cop who really tried his best to be what we would call a good cop. And that story teaches us that it's virtually impossible for someone to be a quote-unquote good cop within the current system. And I think, if I remember correctly from Dorner's story, he tried the proper channels first.
Yeah.
He tried to be a good cop, and he was persecuted for it. And I think that's what his story speaks to.
Yeah, I think everything that we've done in this country has shown. I mean, Gil Scott-Heron had talked about this too, but, like, Black people are the only people who have really been the real people that have showed up for democracy. We have taken this country to every tier of what it was set up to do. You know, we fought the wars, we went and did the court system, and we did the laws, and we did the protests and the marching and the rallying. We've done everything as democratic as as this country claims for it to be. But there's a point where you start doing all those processes and you're told this is a democracy, and you're like, wait, hold up. This ain't what y'all said it was. This is a setup.
Oh, yeah.
And
I've been had.
And so then that's when people start to resort to to other options, because they say, if you say this is democracy, show me a democracy.
You have a line in there, a stanza. Well, I don't know. I think
Please read it back to me because I don't remember.
Well, I don't know what it's considered. Okay, it says, these days niggas don't hang from the trees, they linger on eyeballs of news feeds. And that just really just resonated with me because it's like everybody, number one, has to think alike. Everybody is seeing the same things. No one has a mind of their own. And it's like that line is just, they're still slaves. It's just new slaves.
Yeah. I forget sometimes the things I write. Sometimes it don't be coming from me, but it's like just working through you, you know? But it definitely, there's another line that I wrote somewhere that was about like hashtags being a cemetery. Like how our hashtags have become cemeteries. Yeah. And I think that it goes back to what I said about the dangers of social media. Yeah. While for me, social media is a very powerful tool and it's something that allowed me to connect to people from all over the world. I have friends that I can't spend close one-on-one time with. So it's a way that we keep, in touch and see what each other's doing. Like it's beautiful as anything when we organize for it to be done the right way. I also think that it can bring out and it can reflect the worst in human nature.
It's a gift and a curse.
And to me, I think we've gotten normalized and we've become numb to Black death because of the disconnected nature of the screen and one's projection and being able to say, well, that's not me, that's them. And also just the sheer number of how many people we hear being killed and murdered, there becomes a point where you're rolling and just flipping through and it's just, oh, there's another person, which is why I think George Floyd his murder and his death was such a striking chord for so many of us, was because it shook people out of that comfort and that complacency because people had to sit and watch that film.
It was pandemic. Everyone was on lockdown. So it's literally like there was nothing else to do
escape.
But sit there and watch it. And the whole world was feeling it together.
But I think that at the end of the day, what it did was it instilled, it organized and mobilized a lot of people.
For sure.
And I think a lot of white folks had to contend with their complicitness in what had happened, and not just in that situation, but everything that led to that situation. And I think it was the first time that they were implicated and said, wait, I have to change. This is a reflection of me now. I see myself in this country and I don't like what I see. And I don't want to see this in my country. Right. So people started to say, okay, what am I going to do to change it? There are real organizers who mobilize for that shift and that change. And what often ends up happening is these people are struggling for basic human rights and decency while other people start to get upward mobility to certain positions and visibility, et cetera. Now, I have no problem with Black people making money or anybody getting theirs and doing their work and making sure that they get paid for their work. However, it is clear that the level of work and labor that goes into holding this system accountable is in no way, shape, or form rewarded. Beyond that, it benefits all of us to have the material conditions of the least changed and transformed. So for me, when I think about that moment and that time, I think about all the organizers on the front lines. I have a poem that I wrote for Oluwatoyin Salau, who's an organizer that was killed that same summer from a Black man that she was seeking refuge with because she was actually an activist and she didn't have anywhere to go and she was in Florida. And I think part of what that showed me in that very moment, even while I was fighting this larger system, this is the complication and nuance as a Black woman, right? While I'm fighting this larger system, I'm also fighting the interpersonal relationships that I have. And where do we go? Right. Where is safety? So I think that we have some real healing to do on a ground level, but because of the trauma that is unresolved between all of us, particularly the way capitalism even perpetuates that trauma, because to be honest, a lot of men just want to be white men.
Yeah.
Just want to have the position to throw around and wave the wand of what they can and can't do. And I think that we have to be doing some interrogation around who do you want to be?
Yeah, the imitation of our oppressor is never going to lead to our liberation.
Yeah, but
ever.
we are all victims to it because it's been socialized in us. It's been part of the entertainment industry. It's been in the it's been in the films. It's been in the music. It's been in the ads. It's in the air we breathe. So this means that we have to be committed to, as artists, as lovers, as livers, as thinkers, to looking inward at what ways have we internalized.
Yeah.
Because that's where everything starts.
One thing I really admire about you, and this is a way that you push back against capitalist systems, I think, is that you push back against this rise and grind culture. I'm always grinding. I'm always got to get up and feed the machine. I feel like it's a trick of capitalism. It forces us to move so quickly we don't appreciate natural beauty. We don't stop and smell the flowers, is the phrase. What do you have to say to people who see working and grinding constantly as a source of pride, and how that can sometimes be harmful?
I think that this is a good question. Thank you for asking. I think that it's not lost on me that as a poet, I spend a lot of my time in my feelings and in my observations about the world, which I'm afforded because of a certain sort of privilege that wasn't necessarily, didn't come easy, but it is something that I'm able to, at the very least, at this point in my life, I wasn't always, not until very recently, can afford my rent. Like, I know I got that covered right now.
Well, you have born privileges and earned privileges, but they still are privileges.
Exactly. So there's certain things that I know that I have the ability to do. I think because I didn't have, as a child, the tenderness and softness. I saw my mom struggle. I saw everybody around me struggling. That there was something ethereal and cerebral about pause and stillness and the ability to do that. Like, in the midst of so much violence that was happening around me and just a lot of noise, there is a way that, like, when you can focus your attention on something, that's the art, that's the being an artist, right? On the beauty of this very specific detail that no one else is looking at. And they say that's what love is, right? That's what makes love possible, is that you say, hey, you see that? You see that flower over there? And someone says, wow, yeah, that's beautiful. And when you can take a moment to do that, you can really understand what life is all about. I think when you're in a culture that is producing constant, like, productivity and constant, I need to have and I need to obtain, you're not really living. You're literally a machine, and you don't really get to even know who you are or who you're not, to undo all the things that make you who you think you are. The other part of that is, Nikki Giovanni once said to me that, because I had asked her, I said, do you ever think about the fact that, like, you work so hard and you spent so many years trying to change or speak against this and do this, and there's a lot still more to go? And she said, well, only a fool really is going to think they can really change it all. She said, what you learn is, you're not going to change the world. You're not going to change the world, but you have to be sure you don't let it change you.
It's powerful. And
that really did something to me, because it made me think, like, who's Aja when money's not a concern? Who's Aja when violence is not a part of her life? Who is she when she's healed and loved and moving from a place of abundance and stillness and presence and presence? Who can I be when I'm loving myself and I'm moving from a place of love? That's a very different sense of awareness. Now, do I love to create? Do I love to work and make things? Yes, but that doesn't dictate my life. The most important thing in life is to love, is to be loved. But that's really hard for people. It's just as hard to receive love as it is to be love, and to do the work of loving. So I think patriarchy and, capitalism produces this sense of, I have to produce, I'm not worthy, I'm not valuable in society unless I can show face and be productive and have all these successes and do all these things. And that's beautiful. It's beautiful to accomplish. It's beautiful to make creative things in the world. It's beautiful to make inventions and do these great things and have an incredible work ethic. But I think there's something about balance that is important for our movements. And my relationships, I have to say, I've been praying around this, but I find that I often am attracted to people who do incredible work in the world. And that's part of what I love. But it's also kind of a gift and curse, because until you can understand why you do the work you do and what's really motivating that work, and do real interior work about that, because you think you're doing this work for something larger than you. You think you're doing this work to serve this thing. But what are you running away from?
That's real.
A lot of people are doing work running away from themselves, running away from the hurt and the pain and the fear and anxiety that they have. And so it's not easy to have to face yourself. That's what the pandemic did, I think. The pandemic lockdown made a lot of people have to sit. Because think about how many people was running away from their family, was trying not to, sent this one off to college, sent this one off to this summer camp, sent this one off, was working just enough to not have to face themselves and not have to sit with themselves. And I think that it's strategic in this society for us to not know ourselves, to not love ourselves, and not to be of a place of dignity and self-reliance in that way. Self-determination, which is what Amiri Baraka would say.
Right. Knowledge of self-determination is a song I have. Have you ever seen that footage? I forget the name of the TV show. It's such a brilliant TV show from the 60s. But it was a conversation between Nikki Giovanni and James Baldwin.
Yeah, of course. I asked her about it because I did an interview with her. And I asked her
It's such a great interview.
Oh, I saw
in which they challenge each other.
Oh, yeah. And, this was Nikki being out. Nikki was still like thinking she could save some men, I mean, it was interesting, I think, because James also had a lot of growing to do and stretching to do, even as a queer Black man who had a nuance and a perspective in the world that we all were like, respect. We were like, James Baldwin, he's one of the most fire writers.
She was checking his privilege.
She was. Yeah. And I think that was loving to see he didn't take it as anything but love, though.
That's right.
What I loved about that interview, which is the same thing I love about watching Billie Holiday play with Lester Young, if you ever watched that on YouTube, right? Is that you can see the conversation and the love between them. Yeah. Where there's times where there's no words, and it's like the way she just looks at him and does a little smirk while he's playing, and she's just like, I hear you, brother. I hear you. And it was the way he just sat back and he would, okay. All right. Well, the way he would kind of just be like, rather than seeing like, oh, how dare you? It didn't seem like his masculinity was any more threatened by her speaking up as a woman. Humble. Yes. Than any other thing.
She was what, 20, 21 when that
She
happened?
was so young. And she said she ran to the opportunity to go interview him. It was a thing where she had to fly.
She had to fly to Paris. Right?
Yeah, fly out to do it. So it's so legendary, and I think I'm grateful that you have me on the show too, because I think I just wonder where is the love for the poets,
Yes.
There was a time in the Black community that we had a real respect for what we do as poets, and I think that it's a shame that so many of our young people don't know the power of our poets beyond just self-affirmation, post-it note type self-help quotes.
Right.
But
cat poster poetry.
Yeah, I think there's a time and place for everything. But I think it's important for our young people to have the words to examine themselves and then to express themselves and truly demand a better life for themselves. And I think that's what poets can do when they're really at their best. Is they're helping us really decolonize our imagination. So it's the freedom dreams that we need right now. And we need to give our people, we need to feed each other something good, something wholesome, a wholesome meal. I'll end here. Ntozake Shange once said this, that she saw herself as a cultural worker. And she talked about how when people go off to battle, there's always a time when they need to rest. And she said that was the job of the poet and the artist and the musician, was that when soldiers were at rest that our job was to give them the strength to keep fighting, the strength to keep hope alive, the strength to know that what they were doing was worth it. So I say that as a poet, that's my job. That's the work I'm invested in, is being the cultural worker of that legacy, you know?
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, poetry for me, I've never let anyone read my poems. But I used to write poems all the time just because it would be like a stress reliever. If someone pissed me off, I would sit and like write a poem like
I
randomly.
love that.
So like I have so many books, and like even in between like my joke writing, there'll be like random little poems in between that I've never let anyone read.
You should share them. You know, that's something about June Jordan that we did in South Florida, was we did Poetry for the People, which was a workshop that she started. And I did that in inspiration with her with Dream Defenders and Community Justice Project. And one of the things that I was trying to share with our organizers at the time was that a lot of people were fighting, having infighting, you know, like it almost became like, is this COINTEL? What's going on? You know, people coming in and having issues with each other, and then it'd be the whole meeting, we can't get through a plan or an action because somebody feels some type of way with somebody. And I started to think critically, like, okay, you feel some type of way, let's address it. Poetry and the art and the process of making art in capitalism, it has become about productivity and product making. But really the beauty of it is the process. Mm-hmm. It's what it does to you when you sit down to write a poem, who you become, what you see yourself face, what you confront, how you can connect with other people based off of that. And so I encourage everybody to write and everybody to create, because what you learn about yourself in the practice of creating is some of the most crucial and critical information for your own identity and sense of self-worth, for you to walk in the world with your head high, and to also know what are the things that, you know, you need to face and need to deal with. Mm-hmm. So for me, the process is everything. I think you should continue to write. I hope you continue to write.
Oh, well, I'm going to definitely continue to write.
Yeah.
It's just about whether I'm going to share it. I'll think about it. It's my mom writes poetry too, so that's probably another reason why I'm not going to share it.
Y'all should do a People's Party open mic.
That's a good idea. That's not a bad idea at all.
Yeah, that would be cool.
It's not a bad idea at all.
You just spoke about Dream Defenders. Shout out to Philip Agnew.
Yeah, Rachel Gilmer, Jonelle, Nyla, all of
you two have a wonderful TED Talk. What do you feel the impact and the legacy of Dream Defenders is?
My TED Talk with Phil is separate of the legacy of Dream Defenders. It was, you know, a beautiful relationship that grew out of our love for our people, and will always remain eternal because of that love. When I think about Dream Defenders, I think about what Dream Defenders was able to spark in me. I remember Dream Defenders was the organization that I first saw really like
in the streets,
seeing young people who were like my age and some younger that were taking to the streets, and like the first to really shut down a Capitol, to be fair. Which is also why we were very like clear of trying to critique what happened, because it is the right of the people to go and make and protest. However, what happened at the Capitol in DC was way more violent and armed and supported and protected by white supremacy.
Absolutely.
And the state and the protection of the state. But what Dream Defenders was able to do, which is so important for people to know, was to get young people to recognize their power. They mobilized and woke up the consciousness of young people around, hey, this young boy was murdered. Trayvon Martin was murdered. We can't let this just go. How are we all going to sit around and just keep letting it happen, right? So when you see them mobilize around that, I think for me, I was excited. I was hyped. I was like, yes, finally, some kids that are about that life. Woo, let's do something, you know? And then I didn't really meet them until I got invited to go to Palestine with them. And man, that changed my whole life. You know, going to Palestine.
I imagine so.
Yeah, I going to Palestine, that's actually where I met Phil. We met in Palestine. And post-Palestine, it mobilized. I mean, there's very few things that I could have experienced in my life that would have radicalized me more.
Yes.
But that was one of the experiences in my life that I came back and I was like, this shit is a setup. I was like, this is all fucked. I was like, this is wild. I was like, I couldn't believe human beings could be. I knew that people were capable of being cruel, I seen cruelty. I thought I did. But going to Palestine, I was like, there's an evil in the world I did not even know was possible in mankind.
Yeah, I feel like Palestine, the ground zero for the movement for Black lives or the social justice or whatever we want to call it, it changes. At one point it was Ferguson. At one point it was Tallahassee. Palestine is a constant ground zero for this movement work.
Yeah, I mean, it's the true measure of our humanity. Like, do you have a soul? Like, do you have a heart? Are you a person? Do you see somebody else as a person? It's really scary because when I came back, I just saw it felt like you see the future and the past at the same time. The hyper surveillance, everything that they have there. And I think Dream Defenders, I fell in love with Dream Defenders as a movement organization because I felt like I found a political home of organizers that were committed to pushing themselves and really radically having critical discussions about how are we showing up? What could we be doing differently? What are the things that we need to learn? Wait, let's step back. They were the only organization I knew that stepped back and said, we're going to take a break off of social media because the way that social media is being used is harming our movement right now, right? At the time, the height of a hashtag being the metric of one's movement with Black Lives Matter, right?
Yes.
They're saying, actually, this is not movement. A hashtag is not a movement. That is, it might have sparked people and mobilize people, but real movement is based off of organizing. So Dream Defenders was like, no, we got to go inward and do some real discourse around how are we organizing. Then they did this whole listening campaign and went across the state of Florida, knocking on doors and asking people what they cared about and what they wanted to see and how they wanted to see their neighborhoods and imagine their neighborhoods if they could have free. Then they try to create free zones. I mean, they're an organization where like every time I've seen them be like, okay, this doesn't work. Let's do this. How can we meet our people's needs here?
Yeah.
And with critique, the whole way. No movement survives without having some critical self-reflection. So for me, that was huge. And Palestine was the big initiation of our relationship. And when I think about the trajectory or the legacy of Dream Defenders, I see Dream Defenders almost like X-Men. Like
I feel that.
You got to go through your training. It's like all the other little mutants come together and we're like, okay, we're all fucked up by this thing that we want to change and we want to shift and we want to do some change in the world. And whether you stay with the organization or not, whether you're part of the organization for life or not, you're forever changed by who you became and who you learned yourself to be in that process. So then you go off and you maybe graduate and you become another person, but nothing you do in your life after that will ever be unmarked or not touched by that work.
I felt the same thing that you felt with Dream Defenders. I did in 2012. I recorded an album called Prisoner of Conscience.
You came to our house and performed?
That's right. That was a great, great event. I had a great time. But even before then, I did an album called Prisoner of Conscience, and I realized I'm selling this album called Prisoner of not conscience, like actual political prisoner, but of conscious hip hop. But it was close enough to actual prisoners of conscience. I was like, there's no way I could sell this album with a barcode on it and make money on it without really, really leaning into making sure that I'm showing solidarity with actual political prisoners. And so I stepped up in that way. I went to see Mumia that year. I went to this event, this meeting that Harry Belafonte called with a bunch of artists, and Chuck D was there, and Rosario Dawson and David Banner, Knife Wonder. And I sat at this man's foot and I was like, teach me, tell me what to do. He was like, I'm 80-some years old, bro. You need to go rock with the Dream Defenders.
Yeah.
And I was like, who's the Dream Defenders?
Mr. B.
Mr. B was like, nah. He was like, it's not me, bro. It's the Dream Defenders. And so I found them online, and I went to Tallahassee, and I spent the night in the Capitol.
Yeah,
with
they
them.
told me.
Yeah, and that was that radicalized me in a way to see young people. I'm like, okay, I can play my role as an artist, and I could follow their lead and know what to do. And then when I got to Ferguson, I saw Dream Defenders there, and I saw Black Lives Matter people there, and everybody's working together, and I was like, okay, these are the young people, I'm going to follow their lead. So I had the same feeling about Dream Defenders.
That's really where Black Lives Matter had started from, was after Ferguson.
Yeah.
You know? But Ferguson was going through it before Black Lives Matter ever was founded. So
yeah.
I think that the history of the movement and the political consciousness of the country eventually will be told, like, one day. But the way the media tells it is definitely not the truth.
That's exactly right.
And I think that that's what's important is Dream Defenders has never been super concerned with the media's telling of our movement.
Right.
They have always been rooted and invested in the community and trying to do the best work to change our conditions.
That's right. Now, when you started working with Dream Defenders more actively, you also publicly gave your support to the campaign to elect Bernie Sanders for president.
Yeah.
Now, you called him a people's diagnosis for capitalism. What was it about him as a candidate that made you want to lend your name and your public support? And how did you feel about him ultimately not receiving that nomination?
Oof. Man, Talib, you asking the questions. You really did your research.
Oh, yeah, we do this for real.
Yo, so I think there's no real choice when you have a gun to your head. I just want to say that. America tries to create the illusion of choice, and we don't really have a choice. We're given some limited things and said, okay, make a choice. So to me, when I think about Bernie was, to the political discourse of the country, the most left and radical. But for many of us, he wasn't left enough.
Well, he was the most left and radical who actually had a shot.
Yeah.
Right.
And not only did he actually have a shot, it was clear that his shot was taken from him the first run. So for many of us, who were trying to really think about, okay, this monster of a president that somehow got into office, because I think we all thought like, oh, even the powers that be would never let him.
Yeah.
Yeah, like it's too orchestrated and too, strategic how they make this happen. They won't let that man be.
That was part of my radicalization because I was naive. I was living such a life of privilege that I was like, there's no way that Trump could win.
Yeah, I think everybody was like, they're not going to let that man win. They're not going to let that man win. But I think what we don't realize is how much this country is run by corporations and, and certain individuals, right? And privatized institutions. So I think a big part of that was a wake-up call to us about the diagnosis of capitalism. I think Bernie Sanders would never say the things that some of us on the front lines, or most radical on the front lines, would say. But I think he knows very well what we all know, which is he has his eyes wide open, and he's had his eyes wide open for a very long time about how this country works, and what it's led to, how capitalism is now on steroids. So the thing that I want to say, it's not about Bernie. It was never about Bernie Sanders. It was about the people that Bernie was able to mobilize.
Right.
It was the fact that to me, I fell in love with the possibility of the people that came out of that movement to elect him. I was motivated around it, and I think it brought us together around, to me, where a country's being divided around race. We started to be brought together and having real critical discourse about our values and our ideas. And to me, I thought that was so powerful because now it's not like, oh, just because you Black, you're going to vote for this, or now just because you're Latino, you're going to vote for this. Now it's like, wait, what do you really believe? What do you believe about healthcare? What do you believe about wages? What do you believe about, healthcare is a huge thing. The fact that we're still fighting for people to have basic human decency to healthcare. That was big for me that he was, such a proponent of that. And then the other part of it is Bernie Sanders, I had seen in Liberty City at Tukolsi Center, where I was organized at the time with Dream Defenders, doing workshops and teaching. He had come to visit that center in Liberty City when no other candidate had come, and it was off election. He had lost. It was after he had lost, and he came trying to see what was going on with the housing and what was happening with the electricity, and he was completely attentive and asking critical questions about what were people really dealing with in the community. So to me, that was my first one-on-one moment with him that made me say, oh, okay, this Bernie guy. And I was never about, Bernie before. I wasn't thinking, I was like the first time he ran. And then he ran. And then Phil was able to be a part of his campaign. And there was a moment I really thought he was going to win.
Yeah.
I really thought he was going to win. And not only did I really think he was going to win, I really thought everybody else believed in this future that was possible.
Yeah.
It was the first time I was like, oh, wow, everybody's really thinking that healthcare is a right.
Yeah.
That's a thing now, when we had to fight for that before.
Yeah.
You know, now everybody's really thinking that the minimum wage should be raised. Like, people are talking about this. I think Bernie's had a lot of flaws in his inability, which is actually not a fault. It is a fault in this system.
Understood.
His flaws was rooted in his inability to pander.
Yeah.
He was not the kind of person that he wouldn't stoop that low. For him, it was like the end all be all. Like, you want me to pander? That's not what I'm going to do. And It's like, maybe we don't need you to pander, but we need you to like get your lingo up a little bit. Like, you're cool, got to get a little cooler. Like, you know, just get laugh, make some people laugh a little bit, Bernie.
But
like,
he did make people laugh. And
we made people laugh with him. That's what happened. The organizers around him, because there were some really cool people behind his camp. I believe in these young people, and I think that we need to give them something to have that they can say, this is worth fighting for. And I think Sanders was, the fact that he's in their consciousness now, the fact that that's like in their periphery is important. And I think that's what can lead us to the next person who can possibly move in that direction, or just all out revolution. You know?
That's the other option, right?
At this point, the way because DeSantis, I never pronounce his name right, but he may be running, and if it's him or Trump, it's like,
wait, who may be running?
DeSantis, the guy from Florida?
No.
That's what I.
Oh, really? Somebody was saying that they think California guy should run.
I think Newsom might run. I don't know if he's going to run this year or not, but I do feel like he's going to run. And I mean, just like, because everything that the Supreme Court is doing is like, well, here in California, we have.
Oh my
and
God,
it's like,
we didn't even talk about the
he's doing like all the
Supreme
right
Court.
things. He's having reparations. We have abortions. We can
Y'all
get
are
married.
great.
Like,
Thanks for having this conversation.
When in a French country, you talk about living undocumented in France. How did that happen?
That's a funny story. So, you know Saul Williams.
Absolutely.
I was in grad school, and I was at the School of the Arts of Chicago, and he knew that I was moving there, and I was going through a really bad breakup at the time. And I just was like, oh my God, I'm about to move to this new city, and I'm about to do my grad program, and I don't know where I'm going to stay. And I was just feeling really down. He was like, you're moving to Chicago? He's like, my sister's moving there. And he was like, I'm going to put you guys in touch. And so it was really a blessing. They ended up putting me in touch. That's actually, all of those things didn't happen, I would have never met Vic, because Vic was going to school at Whitney Young with Saul's niece. And when I did this huge Haiti benefit, she had sent me a video of Vic when he was a part of this group called Kids These Days.
Yep, great group.
Yeah, and that was how I ended up even knowing about them. So it was just crazy how things work out. So Saul is a big part of that as well. And then I had never been abroad. I had never done an abroad program. Part of it was I just didn't have the patience to sit in a language class, honestly, because I was too focused on, poetry and all this other stuff. So I was like, man, no. And then I was like, man, I really, really would love to go abroad one day. And Saul had just gone through this whole thing in his life, and he just got up and left to Paris. So one day he was visiting, I think, in Chicago, or he had mentioned to me that he was in Paris. He said, you should come out one time, And I was like, don't mind if I do.
Right. Don't threaten me with a good time.
Yeah, don't threaten me to come out. And I had never really been, I had gone to Haiti, I think, right before that, to check on the water filtration systems that we had raised money for. And then I think I ended up saying, I'm going to come to Paris. And I also went that year to Senegal. And when I went to Paris and stayed with him, I got really cool with his daughter, Saturn, and I was just like, man, this is so dope. Like, my mind,
she was born.
My worldview was expanded. I was like, young girl, like trying to figure out life. And I finished, I wanted to stay, but I was like, I got to finish my last year of my program. I finished my last year of my program, and I made a decision, because I had made all these friends when I was in Paris, that I was like, you know what? I'm going to finish my program. I'd seen mentors and people in the poetry community show faces that I did not want to see, you know, things that I started to get disillusioned by these people who claimed to speak about these things, but then in real life, they were not reflecting the things that they were saying. And I was just disillusioned. I was like, fuck America. I was over America. I've been over America for a minute, but it's where I was born. So there's this love-hate relationship with this country that you're born into. But it was cool because when I left, I had some space and the ability to reflect, the ability to look at the country from a distance. And that's kind of when I was like, I'm just going to stay. I was like, I'm going to stay. And I think I'm going to try to stay first. And I didn't write a poem that whole time. I thought I was going to stop writing poetry.
Wow.
Yeah, I was like, over.
I can't imagine that.
Yeah, I was really, it's funny. I met my current manager, Daphne Collotter, at an event, a party that I got invited to in Paris. And she's the reason why I am currently doing poetry again.
Shout out to Daphne.
Yeah.
She helped us with this, right?
Yeah, she's dope as hell. Like, she literally saw me do a reading as a favor to someone at a bar in Paris because I was like, they knew me from Pops. And she's like, what are you doing? Like, why are you not doing this? And I was like, I'm over poetry. Poetry ain't it. Like, it's not it. And it changed after that. But because of the mobility and the freedom that I felt being in France, I was like, I'm going to stay and I'm just going to figure it out. Yeah. And I hustled doing little odd jobs and doing things. And, you know, I didn't have a lot of money. So I was just really trying to figure it out. And I didn't want to be a burden on Saul. So I was like, being from New York, you're like, I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to find a job. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. And I ended up teaching like little French babies English. One lady who took a liking to me, she ended up letting me, like, without having papers or anything, letting me teach her daughter.
Oh, wow.
And like, we got really close. And that's a whole other story. But France taught me a lot. I learned a lot. It was not easy, not knowing the language. Contrary to what popular like statement, I don't know what they talking about love in France.
Oh.
Okay.
It's the city of love. Everybody loves my accent.
Not all of that,
I am
okay?
French.
I fell in love with myself. I fell in love with myself.
Voulez-vous rendezvous coucou les poupous?
Exactly, because you can have a romance with yourself with the bare minimum.
Yes,
That's
you
right.
can. You can be very cheap.
Yeah.
Now, your writing in particular, I've said this before throughout this interview, but it really makes me feel seen and heard. But you and me, we were influenced by the same type of thing. In 1997, after reading 2000 Seasons by Ikwe Arma, I wrote a song of the same name. And the first bar is, I'm not a human being getting on some spiritual shit, a spiritual being manifested as a human, that's it. In Limbo, you write, I used to think we were human beings that had spiritual experiences, but there was something about watching a boy die. I realized we were spiritual beings with a human experience. We arrived at the same conclusion. What does that thought mean to you?
That poem I wrote when I was 17.
Wow.
And I wrote it because, you know, part of the things, my mom used to leave me around with, like, sometimes would leave me with different people, her friends or other people. And there's a woman named Charlotte. I used to stay at her house. And I was in this project housing. I would stay outside looking out the window. And I would just spend a lot of time looking out the window. Because I was just one of those kids, I told you, I was just like wandering. And I would stay outside. I see all these people running. I hear a shot go off. And this brother's body drops to the floor. And I didn't realize at the time what I was watching until I saw the pool of blood. And it hit me in a way that I think I could never really explain even to this day because I was so young, you know, and no one ever talked to me about it. No one ever, like, that's why I wrote poetry, because that was at some point my therapy. That was where I went to process.
Yeah.
And I remember that night, the police knocking on doors trying to see who had heard about what had happened. And my mom's friend Charlotte being like, nope, no one here. And I had told her. And that phrase or that line came about because, to me, I was like, wow, there was a real spirit in there. Something left this person. Something was like, this person was there, was alive, running, and then something was gone. Later on, I found out that line, I think, is like somebody else has said something very similar or the same. And so the conclusion is that, yeah, we have these bodies, you know, but it's like, this is the car, you know, this is just who's driving, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that when I meet people, I'm like, who's driving? That's
like
my metric of how I see people. It's like, who's behind there? You know what I mean? What's driving you? So it's a big part of my confrontation with spirituality was watching someone die. And death is just one of those things that's inevitable. We all must experience it. So it's something we all know and we must get acquainted with at some point. It just was unfortunate I got acquainted a little young.
I listened to you recite the emerging woman after aborting a girl. And I am a mother, and I mean, my pregnancy journey was definitely a difficult one. And in those first 3 months, the things that you had written in your poem were the things that were going on in my head. So it really, really touched me. So thank you for that, because I mean, those are so many things that women think of, like, am I too selfish to be a mother? Am I ready? Am I, you know, do I really want to be a god to somebody? Like, because you're literally like that child, you're everything. So I really want to thank you for writing that. And it just, I mean, obviously it saddens me the Roe versus Wade overturn, because everybody should have that choice. And the fact that America is forcing women to have children, and as you said earlier, single mothers, the world is not set up for it, and it's really not set up for single Black mothers. And let's be, I don't know if it's going to cut out or not, but white women with money, they're going to continue to get their abortions. They're not going to have any problem aborting their baby. It's Black women and other women and minorities that are still going to be trying to find to abort these babies any means possible, and they're going to be the ones that are going to be suffering. So it's horrible that we live in a country that is now our future. Can you tell me about your work with organization V-Day, a global movement to end violence against women and girls? And if you can dive a little bit into your writing of the poem.
Yeah. Whew, thank you guys. This is deep. Whew, in terms of that poem, it was the first poem I could write about what I had experienced. It took a while to get to that poem. Because for me, I grew up with the struggle of someone that like clearly had days when they were very violent and hostile about their choice of having children, you know? A lot of us grow up with parents that like have regrets. And that's real. It's a real thing, you know? It's a real thing. And I always wanted to be the sort of child, the sort of daughter that made my mother and father proud to have me like, wow, look at what I made, that I would be enough. But the reality is a lot of us have to struggle to raise a person. And what that struggle means is that you give up a lot. You know, you brought up my mother wanting to be an MC. Like, she couldn't have, try being a male MC with kid, but then also a female MC and trying to raise or like doing anything she wanted to do. She used to want to be a DJ. She did all this other stuff. So it's like, when you know that human beings have real feelings that affect decisions that they make, they should be able to make decisions about their own reality, their own experience in the world. So for me, that poem, I just wanted to share that it was a struggle. No one makes that decision easily. No one sits around and be like, you know what? Well, today I'm just going to go ahead and get an abortion. Like, that's not a decision that anybody takes lightly. And a lot of people don't want to be in the predicament where they have to make that decision. So if they're already in that predicament, you're trying to now make it even worse of a situation by judging them as they're having to make this difficult decision. That is just inhumane. It's just indecent. It's not being a person. It's not having a heart or compassion or understanding or love in any way, shape, or form. Because if you really care about somebody, you want them to be able to make a decision that's rooted and grounded in decisions that they feel strongly about and supported in. And that they can struggle with, we all struggle with ideas around, well, is this good? Is this not good? Is this something I want to do? Is this something I can do? Is this something that I even want to, my life is going to be changed forever. So this is a decision that everybody should have the ability to make, no matter your circumstance, no matter how, easy or difficult it is. It should be a decision we have a right to. The other part about it is, when I think about, the difference between white women and black women in this instance, and I hate to make it about this, but for so long, black women didn't have the option of being stay-at-home moms.
Right.
They didn't have the ability to just be like, you know what, I'm just going to be a housewife, right? Not for the last 30 years. There's not a cultural norm of us being able to just be housewives. So our struggles are different. Our fights are different. The nuances about those struggles are different. Also, we're in a time where we're mobilizing around new ideas about gender and identity and what that looks like. People who can have children look very different, have very different stories and ranges around how they show up in the world and how they love and how they want to be loved. So these are things that we have to contend with. Things change, times change, people evolve, people grow. So this is part of the conversation with abortion. The last thing I'll say about this is that in the book, it begins with a poem that's called The Labor Movement. But part of that is that I believe women are the real people who understand labor, what it means to. We are the ones that create the labor force. People who can have children are the ones who create the labor force. So who does it serve to have more labor? To literally have more people laboring? Who wants that? Why would they want that? These are all questions that I'm not going to give you the answer, but just do your own investigation about what that's about. V-Day is an organization that was started to end violence against women and girls by a writer called Eve Ensler. She wrote the Vagina Monologues. She now goes by V. The Vagina Monologues is an incredible, powerful piece that's been used to mobilize people around the world to stand up with and for women and people who identify as women. But the thing about that piece is has always been a lot of critiques about what perspective that piece comes from, who does the piece speak to, and what are the things that need to be updated in our conversation around gender, sexuality, identity, all these things. So Eve Ensler, who's someone I got close to around the Bernie Sanders campaign, we both really, really started to have critical conversations about our values, our ideas, things we wanted to see. And she approached me about writing a new play that would be the center of the movement work to end violence against women and girls, primarily because the work that they do is all across the country, all across the continent, all across the globe. So it was like, we need a piece that can center Black women of the diaspora and the continent. And how do we tell that story? And I was like, well, I'm not the one I can't be the voice for all these people. That's a lot. So we did a call for submissions, and we got women from all over the world to submit stories and pieces. And now we're at the point of about to launch the play. It's an audio play. We haven't announced that yet, but it's going to be launched in Ghana this December. And I'm really excited about it because, we have an incredible sound designer, Fembear, who's really dope. And we spent 2 years working on this piece, and we want it to be a thing that allows people to go inward. So the reason why we did an audio play was I didn't want to do just another piece that Black women could be objectified and be disconnected from and say, oh, well, that's their body, that's them, and then this is me. So how do we force people to go inward and to hear the voices and to actually sit and contend with them and to learn that solidarity is really about how you contend with that listening. How do you listen? Yeah. And then what do you do once you've actually listened? What do you do with what you've learned once you listen? So it's going to be a really powerful piece, but that organization has been a big part of just supporting me being able to merge the art as an organizing tool.
Yeah. And the last thing I'll say about that, it's having a baby changes you mentally, physically, and financially. And that should not be anybody's decision but yours. Not even the man. That's you're the one that has to carry that baby. A man does not have to do anything.
Yeah, girl, I'm there with you. But I think the other part of this that's not being brought up is that there's like I said before, there's so much that's interconnected into it, like capitalism,
like why,
patriarchy, all these things. And so when you think about it, why aren't there certain programs for women way before they even get to the age of being able to have consensual sex, or people who identify as women, right? Like, why aren't there certain programs for little girls who grow up in the world, right? Like, I had to learn about my period not in the best way. You know, you might not have a mother or an aunt or somebody who teaches you about your body, the changes you're going through, sexual education. All of it is just antiquated. So they don't create a sort of society where we even have a healthy relationship
with
to sex.
Yes.
And to what we can learn from sex.
Yes.
You know, there's a Ghanaian poet where she said, this land rather teach women not to get hurt than men not to hurt.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And I think that the society we live in makes it so that we are forced to identify with victimization rather than being created and being offered opportunities to have agency and be empowered over our own lives and our own identity. So I think this doesn't just oppress women, which is the biggest real travesty of people not really understanding. It oppresses men too.
Absolutely.
And people identify as men. So until you can really understand that my oppression is tied up with yours, which is what solidarity truly is, you're going to continue to think, oh, this is just them. And one day it's going to be right. Like I said earlier, it's going to be right on your doorstep, looking at you, talking about, oh, remember that time you thought it was just them? Now it's you.
And I was online, and I'm not sure what state it was in, but it's this woman that has sex education courses, and she wanted to give them to like 7, 8, and 9-year-olds. And part of the course, they were exploring sexuality. And so people were not actually reading the article, and they were like, they're trying to teach children how to masturbate. And it's like, that's not what they're doing at all. But children need to know about sex. They need to be educated about it so that they know, how it can happen. Men need to be taught what no means, what, you know what I'm saying?
Consent.
None of these things are being taught, but then at the ending route, they want to control.
Yeah.
And I'm done on that.
I love it. I appreciate you being able to express that, because I think what's important is at the end of the day, people need to hear it, and more importantly, we need to be mobilized to do something about it. So if there is somebody listening, I pray that you get involved and find a way to not just be lip service about how you love and support people who can have and not have children, but that you start to really put your voice and your body and your values and your dollar on the line, because that's what it's going to take to actually make the changes we need. And I thought about it the other day. I wrote this, and it was popular in some ways and not popular in other ways. I tweeted about, June Jordan was somebody that inspired this in my perspective, which is we always reserve the right to not participate. Mm-hmm. And that's the part that people forget. Yeah. Just as much as we need to participate, we always, as human beings, as a collective, as a people, can say, you know what? Fuck the government. If a government is trying to make us not be able to have women have their rights, how many of us are about to go right now to the hospital to make sure these women, we're going to stand in front of these doors to make sure that these women are protected and taken care of? I see so many people. I've been to an abortion clinic. I've had to walk through those doors, and I've had to face people yelling at me while I'm on my way into a clinic, right? But what would it look like if that same movement, that same energy was being created for us to be protected around our rights to just make a decision we don't even really want to have to make in the first place?
Right.
But it is what we have to do. So if this is the situation and this is what it is, there needs to be some sort of inclination among us as citizens of this country to say, we've taken this in our hands right now, and we're going to protect these bodies,
right?
These physical bodies, because it's real life that is at stake. It's not just theory and intellect and, isms. Mm-hmm. This is real lives that are at stake. And so putting my body in front of this body is really important right now. And that's, I think, something we forget we can still do.
This quote by you, I think, addresses everything we've been talking about. The womb is a specific site of violence, and yet it is not solely defined by the brutality it endured, but also by the creativity it nurtures. That's a brilliant statement. In talking about abortion and Roe v. Wade, and I've noticed use language that's inclusive.
Yes.
And you're trying to, you talked about people who identify as women. I posted a clip by the great band Rage Against the Machine, in which in their recent concert, they're on tour together. They have words on the screen where they're attempting to show solidarity with women, and the word that they use was birth giver. And they talk about the disparities that Black birth givers face versus people who are not Black. And I didn't think twice about it. I just posted it. But I was surprised at the amount of people, and not just the average racist, faceless trolls, but the amount of Black people and progressives and people who I know and relate to, and even people I know personally, who really bristled at and criticized the term birth giver. People seem to be really triggered by the term. And I'm not, my participation in intersectionality is an attempt. I'm not perfect, but I'm trying my best. And so I'm like, okay, well, maybe I don't know what the science is behind that term. Maybe the stuff I don't know about it. So I looked it up, and it just, from what I could see, it's exactly what I assumed it was. There are people who don't identify as women who can still give birth. And regardless of how I personally feel about that, it makes sense that a band as progressive as Rage Against the Machine would do their best to try to use inclusive language. And regardless, and I'm not a woman, right? So I had to be careful in which I thought about it, because I saw a lot of women upset at it. Women feeling like they're being erased as women by this term birth giver. I pushed back against some of the men in my comments who had a problem with it. I didn't push back against any of the women. But I want to get your take on that, being that you on this show have attempted to use inclusive language.
Yeah, I think I said earlier, like, we all have to address what we've internalized. We all have that work. That's our responsibility on this planet, right? I think each of us has a responsibility to radically love in the best way we know how, and to move to attain that kind of love. For me, love means a true effort towards demonstrating care, and specifically not just the care that I want to show you or that I think you deserve, but how do you want to be loved? That's really important. It's important to be concerned with what makes someone else feel loved. What makes, not just what I think loving you looks like. And I need to put you in this box so that you can be loved. I think that is part of my work now, and in general in life. When I think about gender and identity, I struggle a lot with what it meant to be a woman and to identify as a woman. At times, I felt like woman never fit me. As a Black woman, I felt like it never felt like a title I should rock. And then I started to read Black women poets, and I learned about queer writers and Audre Lorde, all these incredible people that started to make me think, Toni Cade Bambara, like all these writers were like, oh, they were able to position themselves with that word woman and redistribute its meaning, to radicalize its meaning and start to shift it and take it, turn it on its head. And so to me, then I started to have this sense of pride, like I'm a woman. And this is because at first I didn't think there was any difference between me and my brothers. I was like, we in the same boat, we Black, this is what it is.
Right.
Then when I started to read them, I was like, oh, that's why I be feeling this way.
Right.
That's what they really be on. That's what they don't realize. Okay, I'm not crazy. And I'm like, oh, I am a Black woman. And there's something very different about being a Black woman than being a Black man. Language is an approximation, right? These things, words, they're just sounds. And we're all just trying to get on the same frequency. We're trying to harmonize. When you get too attached to a word, you got to understand, what is it about that word that you're trying to hold on to? And what frequency and what story have you told yourself about that word that you so tied to it? For me, woman was an approximation of like so many feelings and experiences that I had. And when I met and I sat with other people who identified as women, I could recognize myself. I could see myself in their stories. However, as I've grown and as I've learned about gender and patriarchy and what it does to us as human beings, is that all of this ain't real. Ain't none of this real. You know what I mean? Why am I fighting to be considered a woman or a man or this or that? I think, to be fair, being non-binary is probably the most radical thing, because at that point, we're people, right? So meet me as I am. Love is love. Everybody is capable of loving someone of the same sex or the opposite sex or any of those things. If it's love, if it's really love, if you're not moving from your mind and your intellect, will you act on it? Does that mean that you physically attracted to a man, or you're going to physically do something with a man because you love him and you could see yourself being with him in a relationship? Maybe that's not it for you. But that doesn't mean that you're not capable of having romantic love with someone of the same sex. I think that is ridiculous to try to, put yourself in a box to keep yourself from experiencing the true joys of love because you say, you know what, I can't do that. And that's fine. Some of our people can say that. But they lying, because look at how they treat women. Okay? You mean to tell me you really love women so bad?
Right.
The way y'all show up for each other in fraternity and all that stuff, you mean to tell me that ain't romance? The way some of y'all be looking out for each other? So let's get rid of these ideas about ourselves and start to really uncover where they stem from. So when I think about birth givers, I struggle with what it means to be someone who has had to grow up in the world identifying as a woman and a birth giver, because that's a very specific experience. I can't tell someone else what their experience is. But for me, birth givers who are also women have a very specific kind of vitriol poised against them.
Yes.
There's a very specific violence against them. And people who have wombs, particularly, there is something that a womb does, what it does and what it brings out in people who do not have wombs. What it brings out in them is some of the most ugly, horrendous, vicious stuff I've ever seen. So there has to be some interrogation about that. What is it that they fear about the womb? What is it that they envy? What is it that they find disgusting? What is it that they're trying to control when they control a womb? Those are things that I think all of us have to have some questions about. And that's a harder discussion. Yeah. It's a harder discussion than just being like, well, you a woman and you ain't. They trying to keep the conversation very surface level.
Yeah.
So that all of us can stay arguing. I know you friends with Dave, but to me, that was the limitations of his, specials, was that for me, the comedians are the ones that are supposed to trigger the questions that no one's asking. And they're supposed to also get us to laugh at how crazy the predicament of our society is. How ridiculous the predicament of our society is, not so that you could laugh at the person that's the most oppressed,
right?
But so that you can flip oppression on its head. And I think the failure of a lot of the comments he made was he wasn't making fun of the craziness that is patriarchy. It's wild. You ever seen George? What's his name? George Carlin.
George Carlin.
George Carlin.
His piece on abortion.
The comedian.
Yeah, I posted that.
Not just on abortion, but when he talks about men.
Yeah.
And what they do and how they try.
No, Carlin had it right.
He was using humor to get us to be like, they're crazy.
Yeah.
And let's laugh at it, but also let's be like, let's look at this depth and the seriousness of how crazy it is. So when I think of the Dave situation, I'm just like, I love our brothers, but some of we can't get free until we do that self-work, until we look at ourselves and grow and really devote ourselves to that growth. Because at the end of the day, what does it hurt for you to love somebody else who identifies differently? You know what I mean? What does it hurt for you to actually love them the way they want to be loved? How do you show love the way they want to be loved? Not the way you want to love, by you making fun of. Maybe that works in your household, but the world is different. The world is different than the world you walk in on, you were born into. And I think that that's part of the failure of our men to themselves. It's not for us. That's the funny part. They think, a lot of times white people, they think that they're doing us a favor by getting rid of racism. Whiteness keeps them locked up more than it keeps us.
Yeah, you revisiting that a lot, understanding that people who are members of oppressed groups often operate as if supporting these oppressive systems is a benefit to them, and it never is.
No, that's what Palestine is the part of what radicalized me, because when I came back home, I was like, oh shit, we got to be careful. Mm-hmm. Black folks, we got to be careful, because if we're not careful, we will become the very thing. We will become.
That's a crazy lesson.
The very thing.
And Palestine is the tangible
that terrorizes us. We got to be careful, because we have to be aware and we have to be intentional about love being the heart of it. Because when you think about what Zionism has done to some Jewish people who believe that their identity is all wrapped up in this level of fear and terrorism and hurt and harm and pain, I mean, that's no way to live. When I saw the Israeli soldiers walking down Hebron with them guns, they ain't happy. Mm-hmm. That's not freedom.
Right.
These police officers walking around with that gun, with their hand on the trigger, that's not freedom. Nothing about that is love.
Nothing about it, yeah.
So to me...
it's anti-human.
Yeah. So to me, is to oppress is to be oppressed. To hate is to be hated.
Yes.
So that is why I always say everything has to be rooted in love. That's the most, some of y'all need to go to the woods and take a little mushrooms and, sit with the Mother Earth and do some ayahuasca, sit with some iboga, all of that. I'm all for the sacred plants and the sacred medicine, because once you realize it all starts with love, man, everything changes.
Revolutionary love. Well, we only have a couple more questions, and I appreciate your time and energy.
Oh my gosh, I've given you guys so. I'm glad y'all are still here.
I know, we love it. We love it. This is what we're here for. It's the people's party. It's the people's part of the party. We're gonna party later, but we're talking about the people right now.
Yeah.
You mentioned in your work having sort of these imaginary conversations with your younger self. This is something I do all the time. I close my eyes and I put myself inside of my younger, I attempt, because you close your eyes and that's how memory works, and you can go back. It feels as real as if you were right there.
Yeah.
How has this practice helped you as an artist?
Well, I said earlier that I was feeling pretty good because I meditated today. Mm-hmm. And I think that, that was not normalized in my household. Mm-hmm. Meditation and mindfulness and being aware of like what your thoughts can do, what your imagination can do is not really part of our practice, And I think that sitting with self and finding ways to be still and finding ways to really ask yourself questions or even play with your imagination, because I think, as children, there's a quote that says something like, there's nothing more serious than a child at play. Mm-hmm. And I think about that as a child, what I loved about my, my level of play and my intensity around it. That I want to preserve that level, that perspective and that approach to life, because something about it allowed me to be who I am. Mm-hmm. I also believe in now being in LA, this is so normalized, but doing all this sound healing and all the little practices that people be doing. And it was beautiful because I got to do some work with this woman named Grace, and she did this sound bath and she brought me through breath work. Mm-hmm. And in the breath work, I went somewhere, I transported, and she brought me through the experience of my inner child. Mm. And sitting with my inner child was wild, because she went through so much, but she was a real one. She held me down. And it was the way she literally took my hand as an adult. She held my hand and she was like, I got you. And she was showed me, remember when this happened? Mm. I was there with you. Remember when this happened? It brings me tears. And I thought about it, and I think part of what I wish for us is the ability to really understand that this body and this existence and this sense of reality is not all there is to life. That there is space and room for us to really understand that everything is within us. All the answers that we need are here. So when you give yourself prompts, like as a writer, that's something I do. Like as an artist, I think that's why artists are so troubled. Because sometimes we can go a little too far into that world.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. We can get carried away in the world of the spirit and imagination and depths.
Yeah.
And people can really tap and be touched and be like, wow, that poem really touched me, or that song really touched me. And they don't know what kind of darkness you had to tread through to get to those words or those feelings or those expressions, those notes, those keys, right? But I think the best artists are the ones that are honest and that are truth tellers. And it's not easy to be honest with yourself. You can't be honest with nobody else until you can be honest with yourself. Mm-hmm. So to me, doing that play and that imaginative work is really a practice in creating prompts for yourself to be free. Because, there's a lot of people. I worked in prisons too. And that taught me, I learned a lot about that working with the guys in prison in Florida. For me, I don't romanticize nobody being in prison. Mm-hmm. But some of the freest people I met were locked up behind bars. And they had an understanding of the power of the imagination and the power of one's spiritual frequency and energy and what you could actually do if you tapped into that. So every day I practice that. I try to get better at practicing it. And I want to create a society where, when we think about redistributing resources, I want to redistribute people's time to themselves.
Reclaim my time.
I want people to have time for themselves to be with themselves, to sit with themselves, to love themselves, there needs to be, the thing about COVID, the lockdown that helped everybody was that everybody had to be on lockdown
together.
And nobody was rushing nobody was stunting, talking about, I'm going to go do this show. I'm going to be over here. I'm going to be over there. It's like, no, we're all sitting around trying to figure out how to make the most of what's in the fridge. Thinking about washing down all of our bags as they come into from the grocery store. Like you were really just dealing with day-to-day practical living. And I think that it's important for everybody to have that space to just sit down and be. So, Europe has a little bit of that. They've created that into their system. I also just want to name that I was born in the West, and it's a different privilege to say all I'm saying.
Yes. Mm-hmm. That's
because there are certain people that are not afforded the ability to even have work.
That's right.
And to have the ability to do something they love and make it a reality in life. So I want to be very clear about that. But what I've learned is that some of those people also have the most vast, creative, ambitious imaginations in the world. So it's about balance. It always comes down to balance.
Yes, indeed.
I definitely, especially this year, I would say first day of summer, I went to this whole ceremony of welcoming in the sun and everything. And I've been microdosing and just sitting with myself. And from that, that is one of the reasons why on my Instagram, I am so open and transparent with my followers, to the point where some people are like, oh, maybe you're sharing too much, because people just see everyone happy-go-lucky every day, and that's not every day, and people are not honest with themselves and where they are at in life. I am smiling, but this is what's going on in my life today. Tomorrow will be better, but it's okay. You had, an off day. But I feel like all of that, helps with your art, because as you said, the more open and honest you are, the more creative and the more true you can be to your craft.
I think, and I think you need to learn practices for yourself that work. So that might work for you, it might not work for somebody else. And at the end of the day, some people can go there and not have boundaries. Because there's some things to me that I don't share online because I'm like, that's none of your business. Mm-hmm. And or, my work will speak to it.
Right.
So for me, that's I don't really spend a lot of time being if I'm really sad and I'm crying, I'm not the person that's going to go on live and be like, I'm sad and I'm crying. I'm going to call a friend.
Right.
I'm going to reach out to a therapist. I'm going to try to be in relationship with a real person so that I can actually, but some people don't have that. They don't have real relationships in their lives. So they resort to this false sense of connection that they've created with an idea about themselves and project it onto a screen. That's a really different thing. I think that making a conscious decision to share when you're struggling with someone or not, that's all on you at the end of the day, so long as you are taking the necessary steps to get the help you need
as well
offline.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Because that's the part that I think starts to hit people, because the there's all of that is psychological and emotional too. The endorphins from the likes and the weight and all that stuff. So you can kind of find yourself still putting things up there when it's really not helpful to you really healing and dealing with yourself.
Right. You got to do the work as well, for sure.
Yeah. There has to be a balance of healing in the real world.
So, as we were talking before the episode, I've heard you like to do a poetry special. So let's go ahead and speak that into existence. And how are you going to go about that? Or what would you like? How would you like that to look?
Okay, that's a big transition. Well, I'll say, because I want to say it, I worked on an album in the middle of lockdown, and I'm really excited about it because it's a poetry album that people say that they be like, I worked on an album, but we really made a great record. Like, it's really great. I have some of the best live musicians, like jazz musicians in the world on this project. Christian Scott, who's on trumpet, goes by Chief Adjoa. I have Samora Penderhughes, Elena Penderhughes, Marcus Gilmore, Lucas Curtis, and Weedy Brima, and we all were in the middle of lockdown in Westlake's recording studio, which was Michael Jackson's old, like, he did Bad in that recording studio for 7 days, and we made a poetry album. And it's, to me, really, really powerful what we did with language, but also what we did with the music and how the music worked with the words. For me, I think it's the stuff that we need. There used to be way more poetry records that were taken seriously and invested in. So I want to see that. But the poetry special comes from that same vein, which is, you know, there's comedy specials. I've always been like, there's comedy specials. Why aren't there poetry specials? Why don't we do poetry specials for poets? Like, that should be a thing. Not only should it be a thing, I think it would do well. So I felt like doing this project and this album and recording it in this live way, we also documented the whole process, would help to create more room for something like that to be taken seriously, right? To be really given the right respect that it deserves. I just think that right now, it takes someone willing to take the risk,
Right.
to be like, okay, let's see if this will work. Let's try to do this. Everything great in life comes from a risk.
Yeah.
You know, so my hope is that I'll find the right person who's willing to take the risk with me. I think there's one other poet who has a special, and I'm just going to ask the right questions, and hopefully, you know, we're manifesting it.
It's
he
happening.
just brought that question up in the room. So,
Well, you know, it's really on you, and you are in a prime position to do it, and you should do it. And I'd buy that for $1.
I'm doing it. You're just going to be more than $1 these days, okay?
I got at least $1 on it.
It's that inflation prices now. But yeah, I hear you. Hopefully, you know, we democratize all of this. So,
Aja Monet, it's an honor and a pleasure to have you here on the People's Party.
Thank you. Thank you,
spending your
guys.
time.
Thank y'all. Thank you for this. Great questions.